You walk in and they flinch. Not visibly, not theatrically. No, their fear is quieter than that. It lives in the way their eyes dart for exits, in the microsecond delay before they speak, in how their hands fidget with objects that were still a second ago. Your presence doesn't need to announce itself. It exists in full volume without words. Because they know who you are now. They know what you see, and nothing is more terrifying to the deceptive than being in the proximity of someone who cannot be lied to. You didn't just survive what they sent to break you. You grew teeth from it. And now, just your silence is a psychological scalpel. The room feels tighter when you're in it, the oxygen thinner. Their persona no longer performs at its full potential, because you, merely by existing, expose the fraud they've dressed themselves in. What unsettles them most is that you aren't loud. You aren't demanding. You don't seek attention. You command it by being deeply unaffected. Your calm dismantles their chaos. Your steady energy corrupts their illusions. Because manipulators and cowards alike rely on the instability of others to control environments. And your emotional stillness is something they can't compete with. It's not bravado. It's dominance born from clarity. You don't chase validation, which makes you unpredictable. You don't beg to be seen, which makes your visibility lethal. They panic not because of what you say, but because of what you know. You understand the subtext. You hear what's not spoken. And that's why they can't breathe easy when you're nearby. Your presence feels like judgment they can't escape. Not because you're judging, but because you're aware. They used to laugh at you, remember, in groups, behind closed doors, in whispers. They used to treat your authenticity as weakness, your quiet nature as submission. But pain taught you the mathematics of people. You now read intention like an ancient script. You decode behavior like language, and that psychological accuracy is dangerous. You see the contradiction before the sentence ends. You sense fear behind arrogance, and you never confront it. That's the worst part for them. Your power does not require conflict. It is enough that you know. And the more composed you are, the more they unravel. They hate how calm you stay, because inside they are shrieking. And your presence, your unbothered aura, becomes the soundtrack to their internal breakdown. There's a difference between being intimidating and being unshakably known. You don't need to tower, to flex, to dominate physically. You dominate mentally. Your confidence doesn't roar. It whispers, and the whisper pierces deeper than screams ever could. They know they can't manipulate you. They know their charm falls dead in your presence, so they act awkward, anxious, or aggressively defensive. A desperate attempt to reclaim footing on terrain you've already conquered with one glance. They talk too much, fidget too often, or try too hard to prove themselves. Because your stillness makes them aware of their own noise. That's what happens when someone meets a mirror that doesn't distort them, only reflects with cruel honesty. You are a psychological threat, a walking confrontation to every mask they wear. They can't play games with you, because you already played all the levels and memorized the code. They can't twist the narrative, because you operate outside the illusion. That's what your presence does. It dissolves pretenses. It punctures ego. And worst of all, it does it without effort. You became a force simply by surviving and choosing not to shrink afterward. They wanted your wounds to close around shame, to silence you, to keep you walking around hunched in the weight of what they did. But instead, you healed like a sword is forged, through fire, through patience, and now. They can't even stand in the same room as you without sweating under the pressure of their own conscience. Understand this, you don't intimidate good people. They're drawn to you. They feel the depth in your voice, the weight of what you've endured, and they respect it. It's the guilty who flinch, the liars who twitch, the users who shift uncomfortably in your shadow. Your presence exposes those who built their identity around fragile facades. They can't survive your gaze because it makes them question the very lies they've been living. And it hurts them that you don't need revenge. You don't need to scream their name. You don't even look at them like they matter. That's the dagger. being irrelevant to someone they worked so hard to control. They act like your confidence is arrogance, because that's the only way they can make sense of the fear they feel. But deep down they know. They remember what they said about you when you couldn't hear them. They remember what they did to you when you couldn't defend yourself. And now you stand tall. Not loud, tall. Taller than their apologies. Taller than their excuses. You became living proof that dignity can resurrect itself from betrayal. And that's what burns them alive from the inside out. That you don't hate them. You don't need to. Your presence alone is the punishment. You didn't ask for this power. You earned it. Through suffering. Through silence. Through every night you cried and every morning you rose anyway. You didn't get stronger by accident. You studied yourself. You met your shadows. You sat with your demons until they bowed. And now, your walk alone sends waves through rooms that used to echo with their laughter. You don't intimidate. You haunt. Not with threats, with truth, with memory, with resilience they cannot manufacture. You move like someone who knows how to end things with a look. And they feel it, in their spine, in their shame, in their silence. They crave control because that's where they live, not in truth, not in connection, not in conviction, but in perception. That's their oxygen, their sustenance, their mirror. They don't build identity from within. They stitch it together from borrowed applause, stolen admiration, and carefully curated moments designed to deceive. They require the gaze of others like parasites require hosts. They don't feel real unless someone else believes they are. And when someone like you arrives, someone who doesn't flinch, doesn't conform, someone who sees without needing to speak, you don't just unsettle them. You start to unravel the very reality they've built their existence on. Because you don't feed their illusion. You see the scaffolding. You notice the cracks in the presentation. And worse, you don't say a word. You let them rot in their own reflection. You must understand this: people who rely on perception instead of substance are not just insecure. They are addicts. Addicts of image, of praise, of status. They mold their personalities based on who's watching. They become generosity in front of admirers. They become intellect in rooms with thinkers. They become victims when accountability knocks. Their truth bends under pressure because it was never anchored to anything solid. It was always floating, a balloon of mirrors held together by ego. And when someone refuses to participate in the performance, when you choose solitude over spectacle, authenticity over approval, they begin to suffocate. Because without someone to mirror their mask back to them, they are forced to confront what lies underneath. And most of the time, it's nothing, just echo and decay. You weren't supposed to walk away. You were supposed to stay in orbit, react, applaud, reaffirm. You were supposed to contribute to the architecture of their image. But your refusal to be manipulated was more violent than any outburst. You became silent proof that their entire performance was optional. And the moment someone realizes a performance is optional, the audience begins to look at the stage differently. They start asking questions. And manipulators cannot survive questions. They rely on spectacle, on pace, on flash. The minute you slow the scene down, everything collapses. The script looks thin. The motives look rehearsed. Their tears look strategic. And you stand there, untouched by the theatrics, watching their identity collapse under the weight of its own fabrication. They don't fear abandonment. They fear irrelevance. When you stop responding, when you stop explaining, when you stop justifying your boundaries, that's when their spiral begins. Not because they miss you, but because they can't explain your absence without confessing to what they did. You were their social capital. Your presence validated their narrative. You were the token proof that they were still good, still trusted, still beloved. And now you're gone, not dramatically, not angrily, just completely and irrevocably out of reach. And what remains is the exposed hunger they've always tried to hide, the addiction to being perceived as right, even when they are rotting in the core. They tell themselves stories, elaborate ones, about how you betrayed them, how you changed, how you became cold or unstable. But those stories are not meant for healing. They're bandages for their ego, built to preserve their image in the minds of others. Because perception is their true identity, not truth, not growth, just appearances. And once you stop engaging in their fantasy, you become a threat, because your silence is louder than their justifications. Your refusal to argue, to fix, to participate becomes evidence, not of guilt, but of elevation. And they cannot stand the idea that you no longer see them as someone to please. You no longer see them at all. They post more, they perform more, they overshare, they repeat themselves. Why? Because they need an audience to stay alive. They need someone clapping in the dark to make the show feel meaningful. That's the terrifying part for them. That you stopped watching. You stopped reacting. You stopped needing closure. And when you stop needing closure, you hold power. Because you are no longer in the story they are trying to tell. You outgrew the theater. You left during intermission and found that your silence outside was more truthful than their monologue inside. They crave control not because they love power, but because they fear exposure. And your departure was the loudest form of exposure they never planned for. They will rebuild, of course, rebrand, find new people, new audiences, new illusions. But the cracks remain. They feel them in quiet rooms, in unanswered texts, in the subtle shift of people's tone. They wonder who sees what you saw, who's starting to question. And they panic, not because they lost you, but because losing you meant losing control over how others see them. You were the linchpin, the silent witness, the credibility, and now you've become their reckoning. Not by vengeance, but by freedom. Your absence is the billboard of their deception. Control is a fragile religion. It works until someone walks away from the altar. You did, and now they worship ghosts. They talk louder, they pretend brighter. But the room feels colder without your gaze. That's the tragedy of the manipulator. They kill the very witness who made them seem real. And once that's gone, no matter how well they perform, they're always haunted by the truth that you saw everything. And you didn't need to destroy them. You just needed to leave.